This is the Dynamics 365 show, focusing on the ingredients of a successful Dynamics 365 practice. Your host is Business Solution MVP Mark Smith, otherwise known as the NZ365 Guy. I've kicked off a YouTube channel and would love your feedback. If you like it, please subscribe to it. And if you can, go check it out at nz365guy.com/YouTube. To review the show notes for this episode, please go to nz365guy.com/27. I would like to thank the generous contribution from our sponsor, Kingsway Soft. Kingsway Soft is a leading integration solution provider, offering software solutions that make data integration affordable and painlessly easy. Thousands of enterprise clients from over 70 countries and regions rely on Kingsway Soft to integrate data with various business systems in order to drive their business efficiency and fully leverage their information assets. Kingsway Soft is a leading provider of Microsoft Dynamics integration software, including Dynamics 365, CRM, AX, NAV, GP, SL, as well as many other applications. Hi everyone, I'm here with Tabetha Sheaver, and in this episode we're going to be looking at user adoption and change management. Tabetha is a creator of Plus Delta 314 user adoption methodology and workshops. After years of consulting and coaching individuals and companies on how to implement CRM, her passion for understanding the why led her to a deep study of psychology and alternative methods of driving change, such as NLP. Combining self-help change theories with real-world business challenges, she has helped hundreds of users feel empowered in their business and personal lives. In her spare time, she follows a passion of inspiring positive change. Hi Tabetha, welcome to the show.
Hi Mark, thanks for having me.
Excellent. So let's get underway. Can you tell us a bit about yourself and what brought you to this place in your career?
Sure. So as you said, my name is Tabetha Sheaver, and I'm the founder of Plus Delta 314. I started this company to really specialize in helping business leaders navigate change associated with technology implementations. So in addition to that, I'm a wife, a mother of two amazing little ones, and I just have a strong drive for business. So my career really has spanned a couple of startups all the way up to serving large enterprise Fortune 500 companies. I was the CEO of a mid-sized CRM company for the past couple of years, and I recently split off to form Plus Delta because, like you said, my passion around user adoption. So that passion really started because I was frustrated at my first job out of college. I had needed a system and I didn't have one, so I just went out and created it. And it really made the IT group angry because they didn't want to work with me, which created even more chaos and frustration. And ironically, years later, I ended up working at a tech firm and realized that I just didn't understand what all the IT people had to go through from a technical perspective, what it took budget-wise, or the red tape they had to go through to get things done. And so it became clear to me how important it is for there to be a liaison managing the internal relations and the conversation. And so I just did this naturally for years at companies when I was helping with technical implementation and got some great results. And so that really became my key differentiator.
Okay. So now what's your background then from the Dynamics CRM point of view?
Yeah, so I actually started a practice around CRM at a overall just tech consulting firm here in St. Louis. And then I moved from there to running a practice in Tennessee. And then I actually was promoted into the CEO role.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so how many years in total, around about, would you have worked with Dynamics?
Dynamics CRM has been a little over 5 years now.
Wow, fantastic. Okay, so you've had this background in Dynamics, and then out of that, you've noticed that change and adoption is an important part of any CRM and Dynamics project, and that caused you to create Plus Delta 314. Is that right?
Yep, absolutely.
Fantastic. So tell me a bit about what is adoption and what is change management from your point of view?
Yeah, well, let me tackle change management first because I believe it's the how to the what of adoption. So adoption is a symptom or an outcome of good change management. And I believe that you drive adoption through change management. Change management's a systematic process for assessing what changes are being asked of the user, understanding the impacts of those changes, making intentional decisions about what will change for who and when, and then managing, constantly reviewing and tweaking to make sure you're on target to see that the change actually occurs. When it's done well, there's a lot of planning and thinking through what will happen, when it'll happen, and what that end user experience is going to be. And that should include gathering feedback about your assumptions, testing, and tweaking your approach. So it's iterative to some degree. That's the management part of change management, constantly checking in to gauge if what we planned is actually working. If it's not, you tweak, test, and repeat. It should be an agile process because in every situation, you're dealing with different people, different personalities, and everybody's facing different challenges. And so that's why I structured Plus Delta to be a subscription-based service instead of a flat fee project-based kind of organization, because I don't believe change management ends at the end of a project. I think it includes all the communications that need to be continually happening around the effort of continuous improvement.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so that's change management. Tell us then more about adoption.
So I think adoption is when you need to get somebody to do something and you think about their psyche. So where are they at in the process of change? And change is actually a scientific cycle, in my opinion, that's best represented by the Kubler-Ross change curve. And scientifically, they've proven that everyone goes through similar stages. So you go through shock to denial to frustration, possibly even despair and depression. You know, the point when you throw your hands up and you're like, I just can't do this. But eventually people make a choice to do some experimentation. They figure out things that work. And then when they experience that success, that becomes their new normal. And so in my mind, that's what adoption is. It's helping people get through that change curve so that it becomes their new normal.
Right. So one of the things you said there is that, change management is not something that happens at the end of the project. What have you seen happen? How have you seen it implemented, if you like, not so well? And then what have you seen work very well and how it is, if you like, made or bought into part of a dynamics implementation?
Yeah, so I think that there are some key steps that I notice when implementations tend to go well and you kind of maximize adoption. The steps I would say traditionally are to make sure that you're understanding and segmenting your user base. And I mean that more in terms of what their motivators are, not necessarily what their roles are. And then they typically develop out a journey map and really think through a well-done communications plan that documents what is that person going to experience day in and day out, and what journey do you want to take them on. And so I've heard of so many PMs who are like, yeah, we have a communications plan, but I'm not talking about who's going to communicate what on the project. I'm talking about what is that journey that the actual user is going to go through. And so I really think about good dynamics implementations where you're thinking about the person who has to use the system, but the even more key differentiator is when you think about how is that system affecting the end customer, because we tend to forget that dynamics is designed to serve our customers, not us. And so if you can start putting KPIs in place that aren't like, are you logging in? Are you actually filling out data? If you're actually tracking what is the customer experience, it makes the experience for the end customer better, but the tool then becomes better because people aren't using it because they have to use it. They're using it because it improves their relationships with customers. CRM is just a tool to help you create a customer-centric culture.
Yeah, so true. So once again, just back on that point of bringing a change in at the end, are you talking about when you're engaging on a project, you're having, is it like a daily engagement with the potential people that are going to work on that CRM system, or is it kind of like a weekly or monthly kind of, what's the cadence of engagement where you're kind of gathering feedback, teaching, showing, illustrating what's coming?
I have a couple different ways that I help clients. In some instances, I'm actually involved very early on in the planning process, and it's really just like a half day workshop teaching people how to do a journey map, how to develop a good communications plan, and then they can just go and kind of manage it themselves. In more instances than not, I'm actually ending up being on the project team and then staying after the project is completed because I'm helping the entire process think through what is the point of doing this thing, and then how do we need to communicate and train and empower the person who's being asked to do that thing. So whether that is, capturing leads or doing a quote, there's a reason that that person should be doing that thing, but then they also need the change management and their own level of understanding of not only the why, but the how. And so the engagements can look very different. They tend to be ongoing and they tend to be iterative because I really preach and promote continuous improvement.
Yeah. Okay. Excellent. It's a good Kaizen principle. Tell us a bit about the psychology behind user adoption.
Yeah, definitely. So we talked a little bit already about the stages. And so I think the psychology behind user adoption is understanding, first and foremost, that there is a process. And then the second piece of that is really understanding where is your user in that process, because that should significantly change the way you communicate with them. The hard part of all this is that we're really aware of our own mindset and perspective. So it's hard to remember that we've already gone through that change and some part of that process we've already gone through. And so when we understand that we have already gone through that same process previously, it changes the way we communicate about that change. And so I think this is where the journey map and the communications plan is critical, because if you write all your communications as a cohesive story, you can guide your user through that change curve faster. So that's my goal behind speaking and teaching about the psychology of user adoption, is to really train people to understand where others are in the process and encourage them to change the way they're telling the story.
Right. So what are the key steps when planning a Dynamics implementation to maximize that adoption?
So we have a methodology that includes assessing the culture, the number of changes that are being asked, and to assess the willingness and readiness of the organization to change. Now, most smaller organizations have a good sense of this, but it still helps us to do these upfront assessments because often it's the person in the group that thinks they're doing well that is really kind of wearing the emperor's clothes, if you know what I mean. So everyone's saying, yeah, we get it. We know what we're doing. We're communicating really well. But they're saying that because they don't want to look stupid in front of their boss, right? And then behind the scenes, they just either aren't taking action or they're frantically Googling, trying to teach themselves, right? Or we say we're doing tons of communications, and we do, but they aren't necessarily meaningful to the person getting the communication. So for example, I have one IT group that was sending out these advisories all the time. And they were even having meetings with their different groups. And so they were doing a lot of communicating. They were communicating, we're going to the cloud, we're going to the cloud. And I'll never forget because this admin assistant stands up and she says, you guys are really proud that you're going to the cloud, but we have no idea what that means. And quite frankly, I don't think that you need to keep telling us that because you can't even tell me how to schedule a meeting or to get my regular day-to-day job done. So really, the IT group was leading the communications and the change, but there was a communication disconnect because the user was in the frustration phase. So if they can't do the most basic things, no one cares about the new, cool, shiny things. And it's a situation where the IT group was just further along in the change curve. So we really adhere to that iterative methodology that says, build the plan, execute quickly and often, check in, tweak, and repeat. So do the upfront assessments, make sure that everyone's really being honest with where everyone is in the curve, build a plan, test it, run pilot groups if and when you can, and be willing to just iterate over and over again.
Right, right. So what about coming into a project that's already in flight? You've been called in to kind of rescue the fact that, if you like, let's say the end users are starting to have a revolt against the project. Have you been in that type of scenario, and how do you address it?
Yeah, absolutely. In that scenario, many times. And there's two things I would say. You're a little bit behind the curve because you have to rebuild that trust. And so it's good to bring somebody in from the outside because it helps reestablish trust and kind of clear some of the maybe negativity, but they're also skeptical. So when you bring in somebody from the outside, it's going to take kind of twice as long because now that person has to prove themselves. And that can sometimes cause frustration for those end users because now they have to feel like they have to do it again.
Yeah, exactly. I can understand that. But if the project's going downhill anyway, I suppose it's just a cost that has to be, accommodated.
Yeah, absolutely.
So if people, want to learn more about change management, are there resources available? Is there a wide pool of people now working in this adoption and change management area? What are you seeing in the industry?
Yeah, it's really interesting. So there's definitely ProSci or ProSci. I've heard it's called multiple different things. And so there is certainly that methodology, and I'm seeing an uptick in people going and getting their certification and doing that. I'm seeing a lot more organizational change management, but that's still within the context typically of changing cultures or mergers and acquisitions. There's another group I'm a part of called the Association of Change Management Professionals, and they tend to play more in that other field. I'm not seeing a lot of people do change management specifically around technology, which is really fascinating to me because technology is what's causing most of the change. One person that I really love to follow is nearandfar.com, and he really talks a lot about the convergence of psychology, technology, and business. And so there are certainly people out there thinking about it and talking about it, but it certainly isn't like a formalized practice yet.
Right. Interesting, because in my experience in Australia is that, we had a full ProSci team, and it was predominantly on technology-related projects that they would work on. So I don't know if it's just different in the area of the states that you're in, but we found that when we implemented ProSci across our Dynamics projects, I'd almost go as far as to say it made them fail-proof. It was the secret sauce that really made a project successful or just an okay implementation, because we found the users were really turned into fans because all the way through the process, they were taken on the journey from day one. They had input from day one on the design of how the implementation would work, and they therefore had ownership and really worked collaboratively to get the kind of end solution they wanted. So yeah, I found it very effective. Can you give us an example? Yes.
I was going to say, I would say in the States, we're seeing probably less of that. And I think that that's where we're headed. I just think we're a little bit behind the curve on that. People are talking in terms of understanding that they need to bring users on early, and yet they're not doing it more often than not.
Yeah. No, we just found it really did, fail-safe a project. When we would roll it out on, it didn't matter how big or small a project was. If you don't bring the people that are going to be using it day in and day out on the journey, if they get it just dumped on at the end of the project, there be problems afoot, for sure.
Yeah, I hear a lot of, I don't have time to be involved up front, but it takes you way more time if you're not involved up front, because then you're just dealing with it on the back end and redoing it.
Yeah, yeah. We've the other thing we found very effective is that if we got the most senior person, even up to the CEO involved from the get go, and that he backed this entire project and particularly the change component, it really set the atmosphere then for those people that would perhaps push back in IT, or those that were kind of more not into it or didn't feel that the value was there. At the end of the day, when it's company money being spent, they want to make sure that the project is going to be successful, and therefore that time investment needing to be made.
Agreed, but I would also caution the teaching that the CEO or the executive has to be fully bought in and supporting the project. And I only say that because I've seen so many teams that sort of fall apart unless the CEO shows up all the time. And that's just not realistic for a CEO's role. If they're doing their job, they shouldn't be in every project meeting. And so I've seen that used as an excuse a lot of times, like, oh, well, we don't have executive leadership, so we're not going to take ownership of this. So I would just be very careful there. What I do propose quite often is that at the beginning of the project, you get a video of the CEO or the CIO really talking about why they believe in it and why they're doing it. And then you can play that over and over again for all the stakeholders and all the different groups to say, look, we have executive buy-in, but defining for the project team, especially what executive buy-in means is really important, because I've just seen so many people who are like, we didn't get the support that we needed. Well, the CEO is trying to run a business, not implement your project.
Yeah, exactly. And the scenarios, we would definitely use video as part of that as well. As in, when you're dealing with operations that are running multi-country, naturally the CEO is not going to come to the meeting. But if you like having that kind of impetus behind that, everybody knew that from the top down that's where we were going, and it was a big deal for the organization. Some of the bigger ones where it was like a multi-company acquisition process, and therefore they were using, let's say, Dynamics as going to be the common platform moving forward. There were a lot of disparate stakeholders and agendas, and it was very interesting to see that how, in our case, we're using ProSci for what we did. It really brought the cohesion needed across the organization.
Yeah.
Can you give us an example of an adoption program that stands out for you, as in a specific customer, etc.? Just you don't need to mention their names. And kind of, it could have been a difficult customer, it could have been a great project. Kind of step us through kind of what you saw as the highlights or lowlights of that particular customer. Perhaps you could mention the industry or something like that to give us a bit of a feel for it.
Yeah, definitely. So I have CPG company, a consumer packaged good company that I worked with that walked them through the process. And at the end, and I would say this was a good one, an end user actually came up to me and said, I always thought you could take the man, or I was always taught that you can't take the man out of the warehouse, but you can't take the warehouse out of the man. And he said, but by believing in me and listening to me, you changed that mindset for me. And that not only impacts me, but that impacts my son and hopefully his son too. And so here's a guy who was so sure that his opinion didn't matter, that simply by spending time asking questions and truly listening changed everything for him. And he realized that the technology wasn't something to fear. He wasn't going to lose his job because of it. He was going to get to be a contributor and give back to the customers whom he loves serving. And so I think at the pinnacle, the best implementation, that's the get out of it, right? That's why I do this. On the flip side, though, and probably more often than not, what I get is that I see that the IT team feels more empowered. So instead of being thrown under the bus, they can confidently show that they've communicated in a number of ways, that they've made substantial efforts to communicate with all the users. And so then when the users say things like, well, I was never trained, they could confidently come back and say, we offered training here, here, and here. Here are the multiple formats we use to meet your learning style. And it really gave them the confidence to defend their efforts to the powers that be. So, I have so much respect for technical people on projects that I never want to undervalue those people. They're the ones that know how to get things done, but let them do their job. It takes so much to stay on top of all of the technology and advancing technology and ways to do things and configure things that it's too much to ask them to manage all the stakeholders too.
Yeah, so
So,
true.
yeah. So, I mean, I know that technical people are capable and many of them are willing because they're just those natural helpers and the problem solvers. But there has to be the line in the sand that clearly delineates responsibilities so they can be the masters that they are. So, again, I've had some projects that have gone well, some projects that haven't gone well, and I think the most important thing really is that iterative process that I've mentioned a couple of times.
Yeah. That's so good. That's so good. So what advice do you have for someone if they're considering implementing change and adoption? What would you advise?
So I would definitely say don't wait for perfection because it'll never be perfect. And the biggest failure I've ever seen was when a group said, "We don't want to roll it out because we're afraid we won't get adoption if everything isn't just perfect." I would say set the stage that things aren't going to be perfect and get agreement up front, though, that there's going to be testing and that you're going to constantly be learning and seeing where you can improve. So I think that my first thing would be to say, make sure that you set up a pilot group, right? And position your adoption and things like that as experiments rather than as an experiment rather than this big rollout, because people can take ownership in an experiment because there's no we're going to fail or not fail. We're just testing some stuff out. And so, set it up like that, I think would be one of my biggest recommendations to somebody getting ready to do adoption.
Excellent. And what type of formal training is available out there for people wanting to kind of, upskill in this area?
So formal training is the pro side. They actually have different classes and different levels. The other area that is less known is ACMP, which is the Association of Change Management Professionals. And very similar to a PMP certification or project management certification, there's different levels, and you're actually required to do a certain number of hours of being a practitioner in order to get your ACMP. So I feel like that one's a little more credible, but it's a little less known. So that's what I would recommend.
Excellent. Hadn't come across it. That's good to know. So how do you measure, finally, the adoption with Dynamics 365? How, what kind of, do you have KPIs or any measurements that you can tell whether the project's been adopted well and the people onboarded into the technology?
Yeah, so I think there's some small things you can measure, like logins and opportunities entered and things like that. But in my opinion, very few of those work. I really like to measure two things. So user frustration levels and customer experience. And I mean the end customer, not necessarily the person who has to use the CRM system. So there's something in retail known as the NPS score, I think.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, NPS score.
Net promoter score, yep.
Yep, Net promoter score, exactly. And so I just ask one question. Would you recommend this to a friend? On a scale of 1 to 10, how would you rate this, right? And if the answer isn't yes or a 10, that's your opportunity for improvement. So the problem with user adoption is that we're taught somewhere along the line that there's this beginning and that there's an end, and there is no end in adoption. So if everybody's using the CRM 100%, you don't then go, all right, we're done. You start looking for how can we use it more? How can we use it more effectively? How can we use it more efficiently? Because that's how you get ROI on your software investment, not by saying X number of people are using the system. So if you're, any other is about managing that customer experience. So if the tool isn't making the experience better for the end consumer in some way, then scrap it. If the people who are using it don't know why or how it makes the customer's life better, start over. It's about customer relationship management. Focus on that, and all the arguments about this needs to be in the system, or which manager needs which report, or who's tracking their task and who's not, or which workflows should get automated. All that goes away. If you're measuring the end user and are they getting more value, having a better experience, and is that driving better relationships, extending contracts, driving additional services and therefore revenue? Those are the standard KPIs you should be looking at as a healthy organization. And then CRM is just the tool to help you create that customer-centric culture.
So true. So true. Tabetha, just before we get on to the quick fire questions, is there anything else you'd like to add?
Oh, gosh. I mean, just that I have so much respect for people who do the technical side of implementation. And so, I don't know why and how for so long they've been expected to kind of be these jack of all trades. And so I just wish that companies knew that there are ways to support tech people in these roles and, outsource the planning and the writing and the delivery. It's just too much for one person, and successful adoption takes a whole team. So I think that's just really important for leaders to hear.
So good. So good. Okay, let's get on with some quick fire questions. I'll basically just ask a question. You can fire out the answer that first pops to your mind. What books do you recommend most to people and why?
Oh, the book I recommend the most is called Traction by Gino Wickman. It's really an entrepreneurial system for business owners, but what I love about it is it gives the concept of rocks and doing the most important things first. So have you heard the analogy? You have a jar, and if you put in gravel and sand and rocks, you can't fit it all in. But if you put in the big rocks first, then you put in the gravel, then you put in the sand, then you put in the water, then you're using the space most efficiently.
Excellent. It's a good analogy. Yeah.
Yeah, so that's the point, I guess, sort of in traction is doing these things in 90-day chunks and doing the most important things first. And so that's just a rule I live my life by every day. So I recommend that book all the time.
Yeah, I think Stephen Covey, I don't know if he was the originator of that concept, but I've seen him on YouTube do a demonstration to a university group of that entire, the jar, the water, the sand, the rocks, etc. It's very visual. Excellent. Okay, so what's your favorite apps and why?
Oh, gosh. So I have two that I use almost obsessively right now. One is Hours Tracker, and the other one is MyFitnessPal. So I am always trying to figure out how to be more efficient. And so I use Hours Trackers to kind of do time studies on myself and to see where I'm spending my time and if I'm actually focusing on the things that are going to bring the most value in my life. And then MyFitnessPal, I'm always tracking how many calories I'm actually taking in because I just find it fascinating how wrong my perceptions are.
Yeah, it's so true.
And
it's so true.
The data is just key in both of those apps.
Yeah. Like I go through phases of using MyFitnessPal and I think that, oh no, I'm not eating many calories. And then I look at it and I'm like, one meal is my entire daily intake.
Yeah.
And I'm like, okay, so it's interesting. If you measure things, you can kind of, as the saying goes, you can manage what you measure. And MyFitnessPal really does allow you to do that.
Yeah, it's important that when you measure things that you don't use them as punitive, though. It's informational, and where we get hung up is when we measure and then we use that to chastise people
So
as
true.
opposed to like, hey, it's just information. Now we can improve.
Yeah, excellent. Do you have any daily rituals that kind of set you on the right path of a successful day?
So I start my morning every morning in the Bible. I mean, there's no other book more historically proven to stand the test of time, and it's got an answer for everything.
And so is that an early start for you, or just is it when you get up?
It's an early start for me. I like to have my quiet time, a little bit of exercise time, and then get up and get the kids going.
Excellent. What's the best purchase you've made under $100?
So I have to tell you, my husband and I actually had to talk about this one because I was like, this is such an intriguing question. I was so like, I should just ask people this. So, okay, for me, my best purchase under $100 is Papa Nicholas hazelnut decaf coffee. Like $7 if you get it on sale. But I could not get through my day without decaf coffee because I would be a jittery mess if I had full caffeine coffee all day. And then the hazelnut makes me feel like I'm having dessert.
Nice. That sounds awesome. I've not had it.
Super cheap.
Who do you recommend as a guest for the podcast in future?
So there is a gentleman named Rick Frauman, and he is a sales director who is leading a major CRM undertaking down in Texas. And he has just done an amazing job of rallying his team, and he just communicates with an elegance that I've rarely seen. So I think he could bring so much value to your customers, and I'd be happy to do an introduction.
Awesome. Sounds great. Tabetha, it's been great to have you on the show. Before you go, if people want to follow you online, where can they find you?
PlusDelta314.com.
Well, thank you for listening. You've been listening to the Dynamics 365 show. Please consider subscribing to the feed on your great podcast player. Just pull out your phone now and tap on subscribe. Your host was Business Applications MVP Mark Smith, otherwise known as the NZ365 Guy. Please check out my YouTube channel. For show notes or to discuss anything covered in the show, please go to nz365guy.com/27. And until next time, enjoy your Microsoft Business applications.